Sending is such a joy. There's a quote from David Penman. It's fresh in my mind because I was on a call yesterday and I used it and someone said, "Oh, can you please repeat that? It's so good." He says, "No local church can afford to go without the nourishment and encouragement that will come to it by sending its people to the mission field." And so I don't know what space you're in if you're listening to this, but if you're a part of a church and you're not a part of the joy of sending, you're missing out.
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Well, greetings and welcome once again to the Mission Matters podcast. I am Matthew Ellison, and of course, I am joined by my very good friend and co-host, Ted Esler. Ted, greetings, my friend.
How are you doing today, Matthew?
I'm doing well. Hey, we're coming to the end of a year, and we're going to be talking about some significant things that happened in missions in 2025. We're also going to highlight our podcasts that received the most views and listens. And so I love this type of informal conversational interaction with you. In fact, though I love having guests on the show, Ted, these are my favorite episodes.
I like them too. It gives us some room to missiologically explore different areas. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and of course, it's always an honor to swing swords with you, Ted.
Well, let me just say, I was in the UK 2 weeks ago, and I think I used the word mobilization in a talk I gave at Oak Hill Bible College. And somebody said, "Hey, how come we're using military terms?" And swinging swords, military terms. And I've been thinking about that. You know, military terms are actually found in the New Testament. And the images are somewhat military in numerous instances. So for whatever that's worth, I can understand there is a, kind of pacifist wing of the church today. They may not like that, but it is biblical language. So let's swing some swords now.
I agree, Ted. I mean, the military metaphors in Paul's writings are profound.
Yeah, they are.
And then, we look to the Old Testament. Of course, there's pushback because of all the war in the Old Testament, but Nehemiah's rebuilding the wall, and he's got a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. So he's laying mortar, he's rebuilding the wall, but he's also fighting. So there's something there.
I think one of the reasons why we need to be a little careful is the legacy of colonialism.
Yes.
And the use of the military to advance, imperial governments. Or colonialistic governments, and therefore it's maybe heightened the issue. But let's swing some swords here today.
Yeah. We have to remember missions is cosmic warfare, Ted. The weapons we fight with are not of this world. We're not talking about real swords. We're not talking about guns and bullets. We're talking about spiritual weapons.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's start by just talking about the most listened to podcast episodes. Did these surprise you?
Actually, one of them did not. One of them did surprise me. So the number one was Border and Immigration with Alex Kocman. That one did not surprise me. How about you?
Maybe a little bit as our number one. I mean, this was a big topic all year, and there was some controversy about that one. It unfortunately posted the very day that it was like 4 or 5 days after Trump got into office, and this big crackdown comes on immigration, and not by any design on our part, but just, it was in the production schedule and it just dropped on that particular day. And I think it really wounded some people that we would have Alex on to talk about that topic. I'm not picking on Alex here, but, he was making the argument that it's okay for governments to control immigration. And so I wonder if the controversy there didn't lend itself to that one getting legs as people, maybe a little offended by it, saying, "Hey, you should be listening to this one. Did you hear what these guys said?" And, that kind of.
Yeah, I think the number of views probably had something to do with what you said, the timing. I mean, had it come out at a different time, it probably wouldn't have attracted as much. It still would have ruffled some feathers. But I think the timing was probably part of the issue.
Yeah, and we recorded that, I think, a couple months before it actually dropped. So,
that's right. That was not intentional on our part.
So that's a lesson for us to be thinking about. As things change, that we need to be cautious about that. So I didn't think that would be our number one, but that was our number one. The number two one, I think, is also interesting, and that is the innovation in church and missions with Tyler Prieb. Just for background, Tyler is the founder, and he has a ministry called Missional Labs, in which they try to identify startup ministries. And then they use kind of I would call it a Silicon Valley approach, like an incubator approach, to help those startups define their message and bring their ministry to fruition. So I was glad to see that as a big topic, actually, because we've leaned a lot into the topic of innovation, and it was awesome to see that be up there on the list.
Yeah, you wrote a book on this. It has been a subject matter that we've often come to probably several times over the last few years. And so I was encouraged as well, because I think we need to remember God designed us to design. We may not think ourselves creative, but I think it's really more an issue of artistic. When we say we're not creative, I think we mean we're not artistic. And some people do not have a bent towards art. Like my daughter, she just gravitates to art. She's just good at it. She's gifted at it. That's not me. But I think we all have creativity inside of us that God put there. And so I was really glad to see this surface as well.
Yeah, and I would just say that, when I wrote that book, so it came out right after COVID, 2021, and innovation as a topic in the missions community, it just wasn't a big topic. There were a few little things happening in that space. Now, I'm not saying this happened because of my book. There was a lot of things, COVID included, that created the sense that, hey, we got to get serious about looking at what we're doing here and how we can do it better. But today, if you try to release that book, I mean, there's been books just this year released on innovation. It's kind of really washed itself over the missions community in a pretty significant and substantial way. I don't know if I'd say that about the church community. Mm-hmm. I'm no expert on that space, but I do think innovation has been warmly and widely embraced, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. We went through a design thinking process just a few years ago, and I got to tell you, Ted, it's bearing fruit. And it just was valuable to have someone objective with fresh eyes that came in and asked us questions, generative questions. It was a coaching process. We took our own medicine, and we saw things that we would not have seen without that type of help and assistance. And it really helped us think creatively about solutions for difficult challenges. So I'm a believer.
Yeah, awesome. All right, next up.
Yeah, this is the most viewed episode of 2025, period. This was actually recorded in October of 2023, but we thought we would surface it because it got the most traction. The Other Side of the Mission documentary was the focus of this podcast, and Mary Ho was our guest. So what's going on there?
Well, I do think this issue of missions and colonialism continues to roll on. There was another movie released in 2025. And I know that if you even look at some of the comments on YouTube for this episode, people are referencing that film, I believe. So this continues to hang out there as I think, a significant topic in missions. Matthew, I'm going to announce right now for the first time that we are doing an episodic, multi-part podcast series on colonialism and mission. And I think it's going to play off some of the themes that are creating this interest in this particular podcast episode. Plus, I don't think Mary's had a lot of chance to provide the other side of the story. Mm-hmm. And so that might be one reason why it has got legs.
Yeah, I also think this is a timing issue. Again, this was completely unplanned, but we have Mary on, and then lo and behold, we've got the release of some of these documentaries. The first one we did was actually timed intentionally, but you mentioned the one that happened this year. It's called The Last Days, I believe. And we just started to get traction. Stephen Irwin, our producer. Hey, Stephen, we don't say hi to you much, but you're out there somewhere helping us out right now. Stephen said, hey, we're getting a lot of traction on Mary's previous episodes that have been recorded, in particular this one here. So I'll also announce we're going to have Mary Ho back on in 2026. And I reached out to her and told her about the traction this episode was getting. And so we talked and prayed, and typical Mary fashion, she just surfaced a brilliant idea here. She said, let's go back to this topic, but I don't want to focus on John Chow necessarily. Let's talk about that. But what I would like to do is I'd like to address the fact that every day there are unnamed people all over the planet who are laying down their lives for the sake of the unreached. And she said the reason John's story received so much attention was because he was a U.S. citizen, number one, and because of the circumstances surrounding his martyrdom. And she said, I want to address the fact that we have unnamed, unknown people laying down their lives. And she said, the places that need the gospel the most are the places that are hostile to Christian presence. And so we must become a lot more ready to move towards risk and suffering and danger for the sake of reaching the unreached. And so looking forward to having her back on in 2026 to really paint a bigger picture of the rising cost associated with following Jesus to the ends of the earth. And then you have what you mentioned, this idea that missions is colonialism connected to that. And you have a rise of safetyism and risk aversion. So these are interesting convergence of ideas.
Yeah, it might be worth our time to try to get somebody from the Nigerian Evangelical Mission Association on a podcast interview as well. When you do that, it really takes it out of the colonial frame. I I was in Nigeria some years ago, and they had recently had people killed, Nigerian missionaries killed, working in northern Nigeria in a medical clinic. And I think I know this has been in the news a little bit lately because of the presidential declaration, regarding the Nigerian persecution. But it is definitely a topic worth talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Have a global perspective on this issue. And we're going to shift gears now. We're going to talk about some significant happenings in missions in 2025. And I'm going to build on what you already talked about, the issues in Nigeria, but broaden it out a little bit. Gordon Conwell released a study last year, and they said the rate of martyrdom is rebounding. So in recent years, the rate of Christians being killed for their faith had fallen. So in 1900, 4,000 believers were martyred per 10 years. By 70, Ted, the number exploded to more than 3.7 million. And then it began to drop to 1.6 million in 2000 and 900,000 in 2020. But those numbers are climbing once again. Nigeria is an example of that, growing at a rate of 0.28%. This year, the rate is expected to be 910,000 martyrs per 10 years.
Well, it'd be fascinating to find somebody who's an expert in this space that could talk to the reasons for why it would be on the increase. I know the vast majority of this persecution is coming from Muslims. And so I would guess that something is happening in the global Islamic community. I do wonder if there's some outliers here, like how much of that number is Nigerian, because I know that's a large part of what's happening. That could be throwing those numbers up. But it's a really great reminder for us to it's time to be grateful that many of us live where there's no persecution, but ever mindful that many, many more, I don't know, is it more, is it less? I don't really know, but many do live in the face of steep and deep persecution. And what gets reported tends to be things like attacks and death and all sorts of things like that. But having worked in a Muslim context, there's also the job that's not granted to somebody. There's the permission to have a cemetery that's denied. There's 1,000 different ways that people experience persecution that are not captured in these kind of statistics that are also really hard for local Christians wherever they are.
Yeah, I think that's a good word, Ted. We should be thankful that we live in a country where there's relative safety and freedom, but we should also be mindful, as you said, of our brothers and sisters who are in chains for their faith. The writer of Hebrews says, remember those. And so we need to lift our eyes, be interceding on behalf of our brothers and sisters. I would also add to this, thinking about Mary's podcast that we'll do, that the easy places are taken. The unreached are unreached for a reason. And so I think it's ever important that we develop a theology of risk. Jesus calls us not to retreat from danger, but to move towards it for the sake of the gospel, not foolishly, not haphazardly, but if we're going to be part of that unfolding of the redemptive story of God in these hard places, we have to embrace a theology of risk, which is so foreign to us in our context, Ted. I remember you saying years ago, and I stole this phrase from you. So you've got my swinging swords, but I stole this phrase from you. You talked about how one of the greatest dangers we face in this world. No, you said we face many dangers in this world, and one of the greatest of them is safety. Now, I don't know if you came up with that, but I absolutely love it. And you talked about we try and mitigate all of life's risks from, car seats to bicycle helmets. We're trying to mitigate all the risk out of life, which isn't necessarily bad in all areas. But when it comes to missions, you can't mitigate the risks. I mean, you can, be wise. You can take measures, but at the end of the day, you can't remove the risk.
And I think this is one of the good things about the modern mission environment, in which if you go as a missionary, chances are pretty good you're going to be on a multicultural team with people from other parts of the world that perhaps grew up in a Muslim majority culture, and they've faced it, and they're going to bring a perspective to your team and to your work that 30, 40 years ago we wouldn't have had in mission. So I do think there is that's helpful in that space. But most certainly, risk mitigation is huge. But what's more dangerous than being outside of God's will? Probably nothing. And so, if you really believe that God is moving you toward taking a risk for Him, then the best thing you can do is be obedient to that movement of the Spirit.
Yeah. I have to drop in a quote from David Livingstone, pioneer missionary to inland Africa. He said, "If we wait till we run no risk, the gospel will never be introduced to the interior of Africa." He said, "If you have men who will come if there's only roads, I don't want them. I want men who will come if they know there's no roads at all." And we can say today that if we wait till we run no risk, we'll never bring the gospel to the unreached. It's not going to happen. So, yeah, good stuff there. Ted, let's talk about the closure of theological schools that happened this year.
Yeah, I was doing a little research before our session here. So this is a trend that's been going on for some time. And I believe this year around 8, maybe 10, depending on how you count it, theological schools have closed. But you also have schools that had missions training programs or missiological departments. And they have also shifted gears and are maybe folding those into theology departments or something along that line. And I would just say we have a continued trend here, maybe even ramping up a bit, of schools that used to be involved with the preparation of missionaries no longer focusing on that. I mean, we could have a long discussion about this. Most of the time when I hear about this, it's like, well, there's no demand for it. Yet on the other hand, I would just say I see many missionary training programs being developed that are not formal schools. And so part of this could be just related to the larger trend that's also happening in secular education toward non-traditional ways of getting education accomplished. I actually think there's a lot of demand for it out there, and you see it because of about a dozen or so complete organizations that are Missional Nexus members that focus on residential training in cross-cultural situations in urban areas, most of them in the U.S., but also globally. And those programs are doing really well, and they're attracting a lot of students. I'm not sure how to wrap my arms around this one. Some people might think, well, this is a good thing. I don't think so. I think we want some deeper missiological training and education happening, but this is a continuing issue.
I appreciate that you do surface the positive, the silver lining, if you will, that maybe there is these growth of non-traditional trainings that are happening. But I do think it's a fundamental problem. The Sending Shepherd, the Barna study we did about pastors and missions, one of the things that surfaced that I can't say that I was surprised by, but it made me uneasy. And it was that seminary grads report a low passion for missions. Now, I'm not saying it's causation, like seminaries demissionize their students, but there's probably some type of correlation. When you graduate an institution where the main textbook is the Bible, and you come out of it and you report, I'm not really very passionate about world missions, something is going on here. So yeah, we need to poke into this one a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is a important issue for the long-term health of the missions movement, but also the health of the church. You and I have talked about this before, but missions lives downstream from the church, and the church lives downstream from missions. They're both
That's right.
So we want to see a healthy educational system kind of undergirding what's happening. And one of those areas is actually another trend we have here, and that's technology and AI, its application in the Global Great Commission. Big topic, at least among mission agencies, about the ethics of using AI, about the specific applications in the ways that it's happening. I will say this, at our annual conference this year in September, we had a session on AI, and it kind of blew us away. We had to go and remove a wall between two rooms because so many people were choosing that elective and wanted to be a part of that discussion in that room. So I can tell you that this is super high interest in the missions community, and AI is already being used in many numerous ways.
Yeah. I was not an early adopter, Ted, I must admit. I was in Phoenix a few years ago watching the Waymo cars drive around, these driverless cars. They're really popular in Phoenix. And I'm like, I just don't know how I feel about robots driving a car. And then, we have robots writing papers and everything else. But I've started to use AI, and I have to tell you, there's been some definite benefits. I think you have to use a lot of wisdom. Discretion is necessary. But I do believe it's a tool we should leverage for the kingdom. I look forward to digging into that deeper. Maybe we need to do a topic on that next year, a podcast to really explore a little deeper the ethics behind this.
Yeah, there's actually some large organizations with some funding that are trying to move some pieces around on the chessboard for various ministries right now. Some don't like those moves. This is an area I think that's going to continue to settle out for years to come. When we're recording this, I have a feeling that by the time it's produced, there's going to be some resets in the financial markets surrounding AI that will have a ripple effect on mission as well, I believe. I mean, the Bible translation world has really been influenced, probably the most of any sector of ministry in terms of the Global Great Commission. It's really that translation sector. But let me just say this too. I've talked about this and I've written about this. So if you're hearing this for that fifth or sixth time, forgive me. But when I was in Africa this last summer, we heard testimony after testimony after testimony. Former Muslims, hey, I had a vision of Jesus. But in the morning when they woke up, or when they got to any amount of privacy after having that dream or vision, what's the first thing they did? Is they went on to their phone and they started going and doing research on who this Jesus is. So the impact of digital tools in answering these questions, I think it's going to be significant to the point where the use of technology has kind of moved from a topic that a few specialists know about to where I would say every single missionary team should have a digital strategy of some sort. It's just so prevalent and ubiquitous that it can't be optional. We have to be able to use these tools to communicate who Jesus is.
I agree. We've got room for a few more of these, Ted. So I want to talk about something that you and I have witnessed firsthand, and I'm hearing more and more stories of this happening around the country, but emerging collaboration and coalitions. So 2 years ago, we did a mobilized church workshop in Roanoke, Virginia, where we had about 17 churches in the room, about 70 leaders. And you're a speaker at our mobilized church workshop. It's all about helping churches think about, what does a mobilized church actually look like? How do we develop and cultivate a vibrant missions culture? Well, we have 7 agency partners in the room for those gatherings, and we introduced churches to those value propositions. Well, came out of Roanoke was 7 churches initially, now 8 came together, and they said, let's collaborate and engage an unreached people group. They're working in Southeast Asia and Indonesia. They've been doing it 2 years now. They have a common objective. They have shared values. They're different denominations, Ted. different traditions. They've set all those things aside and they're coming together to reach a people group. We actually had them on the podcast this year. And then you and I were in Phoenix recently where there's another emerging coalition. There's a group of churches in Phoenix, again, different denominations, some independent churches, a few agencies coming together to reach the Bengali people. I'm hearing more and more stories of this. I believe God is up to something.
Yeah, I think collaboration is happening in other spaces as well. I'm seeing funding collaborations across the board. I just saw one this morning. Large Church Planting Network has got a foundation now backing them with a guaranteed amount of money that is going to be given away to church planting initiatives. And I'm aware of, probably 5 or 6 funding collaborations and coalitions. And then there are significant mission agency collaborations happening as well. So I do think this whole idea of working together, I mean, it's been rising, but it's really getting some legs now. And it's really becoming, I think, far more widespread.
Yeah, I think of the garden prayer that Jesus prayed in John 17, that his people would be one as he and the Father are one, that the whole world will know that Jesus was sent by the Father. And I just see such beautiful things happening right now. I will say, I'm going to go plug for Missio. Of course, I'm a champion for Missio, but I've seen at the gatherings that we do annually, the conferences, that this is just, the needle keeps moving up. Like I look back 8-10 years ago, and there was a bit of standoffishness. I can't explain it. But now there is just this warm embrace. Something is going on, Ted, that's really remarkable. And if you're not a part of a collaboration of some kind, whether it's with other churches or agencies, I got to say you're missing out. It is fun.
Yeah. So I just spent a couple of days in Atlanta. We had an event that we did for mission agency CEOs and their board chairs coming together. And it was a phenomenal time of sharing between these different organizations. Very, very encouraging to hear the conversations and looking over the reviews. Just so many people saying, to be in a room where people will give away all their secrets just to help us be better at what we do, it's an incredible thing. And that's really what's going on. And man, why did it take so long for us to get to this point? But it is a point of real encouragement to me, obviously, because I lead a network that's about collaboration and about getting people to freely and generously share. So
yeah, you're right.
I love this one.
I see a posture of open hands right now. Like what God has given me, I'm just going to share it with you. It's pretty great. We've got 2 more. I'm going to pick one. You're going to pick one. So you're next, and then I'll do the last one.
Okay. So this is one I'm not sure I agree with. That was in our list. And that is the decline of missionary sending. And it may be happening, but the truth is we just don't know. Because the organization that used to really keep the best statistics on this happens to be the one I lead. And we don't keep the best statistics on this for a variety of reasons. Statistics we used to have were sampled and extrapolated. In other words, there may be, hundreds and hundreds of mission agencies. We only got data for 40 or 50 of them. Let's extrapolate that out to the 150 to 200 or whatever they were doing back in the day. And I just think we have no clue what's really going on with missionary sending. For a lot of different reasons. And we have decided we're all going to report on actual numbers that are collected. So you really can't compare what we're reporting today versus before. We have organizations that are in decline for sure in terms of recruitment numbers. But we also have organizations that are having their best recruiting years ever. So I would say this is a narrative that's out there that we can't send missionaries like we used to. But I would also say we actually don't really know what's going on.
So we need to get to the bottom of this one, I think. I don't know how it's going to happen, Ted, but anecdotally, I've talked to many organizations who are seeing a decline. I have talked to some who are seeing growth. I will also say, because I spend so much time in local churches, when we're coaching a church, it's not uncommon to hear them say, we've not sent missionaries for several years. And in fact, that's one of the reasons they bring us in, is they're frustrated with status quo. Like we've kind of gone into maintenance mode. We need a compelling vision for the future that's going to motivate people to go again. And so it's ultimately a positive thing. But I am very curious as to what the real numbers are, especially when we talk about things like a lack of missiological education happening at institutions, et cetera. I really wonder what the real numbers are.
We've had Michael, my coworker and I have had some discussions about how many potential members of Missio Nexus out there that are agencies. And as we have processed this and we've gone online and we've downloaded nonprofit databases from the U.S. government, we've segmented them by evangelical, we've segmented them further by global. We actually believe that there's about 8,000 mission agencies just in the USA. That's a big number. But what you need to remember, when we talk about 8,000, many of those are family run or they're one person organizations. Or it's, I went overseas with my church and I met, Julian, who's working in the Dominican Republic. He has a school. I created an organization to raise money for him. So those organizations I call them micro missions, are very different than what we tend to think of traditionally when we're thinking about mission agencies. And I'm super excited about the fact that there's probably some thousands of new expressions of mission that are growing up out there. Now, I do think they're probably somewhat missiologically challenged. They're not necessarily thinking through dependency or all sorts of issues, okay, that they at some point will mature into and start thinking about. But those are also kind of unique ways of sending that really weren't happening at the scale that they're happening at today that influences that number, and why it's very hard to really figure out what's happening with missionary sending.
Yep. Let me just say, if you're a church leader online today, you're watching this or listening to this, sending is such a joy. There's a quote from David Penman. It's fresh in my mind because I was on a call yesterday and I used it and someone said, "Oh, can you please repeat that? It's so good." He says, "No local church can afford to go without the nourishment and encouragement that will come to it by sending its people to the mission field." And so I don't know what space you're in if you're listening to this, but if you're a part of a church and you're not a part of the joy of sending, you're missing out. Step into it for sure. But let's see if we can't find some real data soon.
Yeah, we do. It'd be interesting too. I don't know how you would study this, but what happens to churches that send their own? There was a study done on this, I think back in the 80s. By an organization that I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they used to teach the faith promise model in churches pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. And they did some research on what happens when you use faith promise, which included a significant missions component. And those churches were not all, but most of them were growing and healthy as a result of a bigger emphasis on mission. But it'd be a great study. We need a couple of different studies here we're talking.
I think you're right. You already mentioned this, that missions is necessary not only for the life of the world, but the life of the church, the health and the vitality of the church. No doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
for sure.
Last one. This is not on our list, so I'm throwing this out kind of as a curveball here for you, Ted. There are signs of spiritual awakening happening among young people. I've spent some time with Mark Matlock. I know you have as well. He heads up Urbana, and there's some signs of life that are very encouraging. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, I do think that's true. I mean, when you and I were in Phoenix, we had discussions with some of these church leaders, and they talk about what's happening in Phoenix. It's like, wow, there's just a lot of response triggered by Charlie Kirk and his assassination. I can tell you that my wife and I actually moved a few months ago, so we've been church shopping. But we've been at one quite a bit since June, early summer. And I would just say this last Sunday, we almost couldn't find a seat when we went in that place. I think churches are seeing some real growth right now. And I think there's, in that church, we felt like we were the, oldest farts in the whole building. Everybody was young, a lot of young people.
Yeah.
So I would just say anecdotally, I feel like that's happening. I know like Ryan Burge or Berge, I don't know if you know him, but he's a researcher. He said they're looking at the numbers and they're not seeing any difference. But then I looked at their numbers and their numbers are all like 6, 7, 8, 9 months old. And I think this is really recent.
Yeah, Mark talks about young people purchasing Bibles at an increased rate right now. Again, churches who are seeing more young people return. And I think they're they're disillusioned by what they've been hearing in the world. I think something is happening right now. I pray so. I mean, I'm no prophet. I can't see the future. Ted, I will be happy to see you in Phoenix at Urbana 2025. I guess it's 2025, 2026, because it goes on into the new year. But I know we're both speaking at that. And I'm expecting great things from God. I just, I don't know how many are going to be there, 7,000, 8,000. I'm not sure the numbers what it'll end up being, but worshiping with those young people and expecting the Spirit of God to set something in motion. I want to witness it. So I'm praying for that.
I'm looking forward to it as well, Matthew. And I'm teaching in the pastor track. Is that where you're teaching as well?
That's where I'm teaching as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of response they've gotten from pastors, what kind of interest they're going to show in the room. And I get to talk on this topic we're just mentioning, and that's sending. How should a church respond when somebody expresses interest? And I hope a lot of churches are struggling with that question. That's something we should be praying for.
Yeah. My session is on the sending shepherd. I'm going to do a thought leader briefing on some of the findings of the book and the role of the pastor in sending. So it's going to be a dovetail with yours. But here's the thing. If there really is a spiritual awakening happening among young people, I hope it's marked by the type of awakening that happened with the student volunteer movement. And that was a movement to the nations. If that's really going on, they're going to need sending churches, Ted, which you're talking about. And those churches need sending shepherds as well. We need to be ready for what's coming.
I was in the UK recently, and they've got something going on there as well. They call it the Quiet Revival. And it's essentially young people showing an interest in spirituality. I don't think it's not like mega numbers, but it's mega serious. They're leaning into issues of discipleship and just some really neat stuff I think is happening there too. But I'd say it's very different than what we're seeing here in the U.S. So maybe on a global basis, there's going to be some juggling going on here, and the Spirit of God's going to move in ways that, right now we can't even envision.
Well, Ted, it's been a good year of podcasting with you. Look forward to swinging swords with you in 2026, and maybe some of these topics we surface will end up on our episodes.
Amen. Thanks a lot, Matthew. Lord bless, and have a great new year.
Yeah, likewise.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Esler, president of Missio Nexus.